Welcome to China Paradigm, a show powered by Dashi Consulting, where we interview seasoned entrepreneurs and experienced managers in China about their business and experience in the country. Hello everyone, I'm Matthieu David, the founder of Dashi Consulting and its podcast China Paradigm. Joining me today is Steve Mushero. You are the founder of China and Cloud. You founded back in 2008, but you have been in China since 2005, so more than 15 years. You have been in technology from the very start of your career, since 1993 in softwares, and you saw the rise of the internet, the changes in technology, both in Silicon Valley, in the US, and in China. Talking more about China Net Cloud. So founded in 2008, you managed more than 1,000 servers in 2012, and in 2013-14, it was thousands of servers you were managing. China Net Cloud became YunChang network technology in 2018. So what you are offering is cloud services. So this word is well known by the public now that Amazon is doing it, Alibaba is doing it, but most people think that it's basically a server in the internet. But it's much more like that than that. When we read what you do, you are providing additional services on top of the server, which is, of course, troubleshooting, of course, monitoring, but much more to help developers developing in a safe and fast environment. So you have raised, based on information, $9 million USD in 2015, and you have a team of about 25 people now. Numbers are changing very fast, so you may update us on that. To talk about cloud, the market size of cloud in China is estimated to be 84 billion RMB, with a growth of 30-50% every year. And actually, the big players, Alibaba, Tencent, Baidu, are trusting 75% of the market. So there's still 25% for other players. And I was a bit surprised that actually there's still 25% for other players when you have that big players like Alibaba, Tencent, and Baidu in the game. Thanks for being with us. And would you mind precising what you do exactly? Cloud seems to be a very big environment, and I have a sense that there are some niches you may work on. Would you mind sharing a bit more?
Sure. And thanks for having me on. Broadly, we think of cloud computing really in two separate areas. There's sort of the consumer part and the, let's call it company or enterprise part, So for the casual consumer, that isn't really in tech, cloud is really like iCloud, right? I can store my documents up there. Maybe I can do some backups. Maybe I have Box or Dropbox for some documents. It's basically how you and I can share files, or maybe even have music or things like that in the cloud. So that's a whole consumer world that I'm not too close to. We think about then cloud computing as the enterprise or the corporate side, which is what Amazon and Ali and everybody else does. But yeah, it's important to separate those. And yeah, basically it's renting or sharing servers and computers in the cloud. When we started, there was none of this. We were actually the first cloud provider in China in 2008. But at the time, and in the US also, most servers, which is what you need behind applications or websites or mobile apps or really anything online, were physical servers. So you went to Dell and you bought a box, or IBM or somebody, and you put it in a rack in a data center someplace and had air conditioning and all that. So we did a lot of that. And then obviously that's very expensive. It's very slow. If you want to do something, you can actually go buy that thing. You got to wait 2 weeks for it to be delivered. You got to wait more. So it takes weeks or months to get new servers. The cloud essentially virtualizes that and shares all of that. So I can have a new server on Amazon, in the next 5 minutes. And so that created all kinds of different dynamic ways of building things quickly. And then on top of that, now you have a lot more services because you can rent the server. Well, I can also rent a database. I can rent networking. I can rent security. I can do all this other types of things. And that's really where all these clouds are focused. But at its heart, it's taking, physical servers and essentially sharing and virtualizing those. And that's, now a $100 billion business globally. 10 years ago, it was, zero. So that's really changing the world and lowering the cost for a lot of people, making it much more flexible, great things. And so our role in that, all through this, before and after the cloud world, was and is what we now call managed services. So it's really designing, building, and operating those things, because it's quite complicated. Whether it's physical servers or cloud, you have to do with disks and memory and configurations and networking and security, and you have to do this 24/7. So 3 a.m, your users don't care if you're not at the office. If something breaks, you still got to fix it, right? So we do all of that, have always done that. So it's, it's monitoring and security. It's lots of engineers in a room with big screens, kind of like you'd think, like NASA a little bit. Managing and fixing and dealing with all of this stuff. So that's really what we're doing, sort of managed services in a way. You might own the servers, we might own them, Amazon might own them. We sort of don't care. Our job is to kind of run all of that and keep it working. So that's sort of what our business is.
About the size of the company, I was mentioning 25 people. The numbers I was mentioning, like you raised $9 million USD in 2015. Are the numbers correct in 2020?
More or less, yeah. We've raised a variety of money over the years. Starting in 2008, we've done sort of angel rounds and then multiple sort of VC rounds. So there's different blocks in there. And then, a number of people has kind of gone up and down with sort of business and economy and so on. With the coronavirus and the things now, things aren't as great as they were. And as the industry's changed and so on. So we've sort of, yo-yoed a bit in people over time. So it's 25 or 30 people now.
Talking about your clients, you are a foreigner based in China in a business which is cloud, which is internet, which usually a very Chinese business. To give a sense of how Chinese it has to be, I think Baidu, for instance, which is listed on the NASDAQ, it's actually not really listed on the NASDAQ. The equity is not listed on NASDAQ. It has actually a contract between a company, the NASDAQ, which is listed, and the equity in China, in mainland China, because foreigners cannot own shares of Baidu. But there is a VIE, variable interest equity. So that means it's a very regulated, restricted for foreigners. How did you play in this industry as a foreigner in the cloud industry?
Well, it's changed over time, and it's not only just in the cloud, it's more about telecommunications in general and so-called value-added telecommunications services and data centers. And like a lot of things in China, it's a little bit murky. And so we started in really the management and operations. We generally have not owned a lot of things. So essentially, early on, you owned it, the customer. And so we just manage it. So we're sort of consulting business in that sense. So we're managing your stuff for you, just as if we managed your office or your car or something. Then when we started offering cloud services ourselves and various hardware and so on, we used third parties to do that. And so you would sign multiple contracts. You would sign a contract with us for management, and you would sign another contract with a provider, usually for bandwidth and so on. And this is exactly how AWS got started here. You actually, early on, you signed multiple contracts with AWS in the same way with Amazon to work with these regulations. Over time, this has become more strict, and now you have to be more local. So, for example, you've seen Amazon become more local. Microsoft already kind of started local with a local partner. So that's what we're doing that. And we become more local also. So there's a variety of issues around that. But still, we're very focused on the management part, not so much on the cloud part. The real issues are around sort of who's responsible for the content, so-called ICP licenses, and buying the bandwidth. That's kind of where the rubber hits the road, if you will. You sort of need the license and the responsibility when you start sort of transmitting data out to the world. So there's a lot of new customers. We discuss a lot about that. Yesterday we had a customer talking about, okay, these are the licenses, these are the issues, this is what we can do before you have a license, this is what you can do after. Local entities, what are you doing? Because if you're in protected areas like news or video or other things, there's extra things. If you're doing APIs and SaaS, there's all this relatively complicated regulation. And so, yeah, we do a lot of that. So.
Is it the niche you are after? The foreign players, or let's say international players in China, who need both an understanding of international interactions connecting with other servers overseas and so on, but also and mainly in China. Is it the niche you are after to provide for this service for foreign services, or you also providing for Chinese companies?
Well, most of our customers are Chinese. So we have sort of the bulk of things are Chinese customers. Although kind of what's a Chinese customer, what's a foreign customer is not always clear. We also have a lot of sort of global Fortune, 500 companies usually coming into China. So they're coming in and operating things here, companies like Swatch or other ones, brands and so on. So they need infrastructure here. So we do that. There's usually not much interaction with the outside world. It's more about what they're doing here. And various other beverage companies and brands and so on. But most of our business is actually local companies. So it's local, internet, game, news, lots of different things, applications and so on. So yeah, you do have to know about obviously international components, international connections, great firewall kind of challenges, VPN connections and so on that are necessary to run sort of commercial businesses. So we do a lot of that.
With those big players, which are, as we mentioned, Alibaba, Ali, as you mentioned, Tencent, Baidu, how do you differentiate yourself? AWS as well. How do you position yourself? I believe those players are well known by the public now, easy to get access to, those big players. What's your segment? How do you differentiate?
Well, we're partners with all of them. Right, because they provide the actual infrastructure. So we used to provide public clouds and servers. We were before all of them, actually. We were launch partner for AWS here, very early partner for Aliyun. We started before all of them in China. But, renting servers and running clouds is not a very good business in a lot of ways. So we were happy when they finally got here because then we could use all their stuff, right? So we are actually their partners. So typically or often you'll go to them or you'll want to run something on the cloud. You will come to us and we will then work with you or sell you AWS or Ali or Tencent or whatever, and we'll actually manage it. And the reality is, again, those are quite complicated services, and so we help you, deal with that. But we're all partners, so we all work together. Generally, AWS, for example, or Ali, they'll sell you the cloud, but they really don't help you very much. They might tell you how to architect a little bit, but once they've sold it to you, it's yours. It's like a car, right? You buy a car or you rent a car. Okay, you have the car, now you're driving it. That's it, right? They don't drive it for you. It's kind of the same here. So we can drive it for you. So that's kind of how it works. So we all work together. So.
I see. I understand better. Would you describe then your company as a service company or still as a platform? We are in a world where the word SaaS, PaaS, IaaS are very, very common. Are you defining yourself as do you have a system as a SaaS, as a PaaS, or you are providing services which is actually tailor-made for each client, and you would use then the services from SaaS and so on of Alibaba, Tencent, Baidu, and AWS?
Well, we're primarily a service company. We do have our own SaaS system, but it's really about managing those services. So we offer both. But it's really about managing the services. And, for most of them, we're using their infrastructure as a service. So usually not much else in terms of their platform. But essentially, yeah, we're a service provider, or a managed service provider, so-called MSP, on top of all of them, if you will. And we have our own tools and technology and so on that helps with that. But in the end, it's really still services, generally.
I see. I understand. So you have your own tools internally. You use it to provide the service for your clients.
Correct. And we also sell those tools separately to customers that want to do their own. So we sort of have both of that. But it's really all about management and operations. And that's all pointed at AWS or Ali or Tencent or whatever. Baidu's not really a player. So.
Okay, got it. You mentioned the coronavirus as something negative just before, at the beginning, actually, talking about the size of the team. But it's a bit contrarian. We could see actually what has happened with the coronavirus as something positive. People spend more time online. You had companies want to go online, to develop online. Haven't you seen this momentum?
Well, I think you've seen a little bit, but what you kind of miss there is they're not spending more online. Maybe they're spending more in e-commerce, but the advertising market and more business market in general has fallen off. And so our customers that are advertising based are really in trouble, it appears. And so that affects their ability, for example, to pay us. And that's a significant problem. I think you're seeing that more globally. People can't pay the rent, they can't pay a lot of stuff, and they also can't pay their service providers. So we have, big customers who, can't pay us and don't know when they can pay us and this kind of stuff. So that is a problem, obviously. And so I think, yes, in theory, you're getting more of certain industries in certain cases happening, more gaming, that kind of stuff. It doesn't necessarily generate more business for us. It does in some cases. We have some brands that are scaling up to do more stuff and more at-home sales and e-commerce and things like this. We had a customer order more servers yesterday, which is nice. But the question is, how do you balance that with those that might die? And that's always been a problem for us because we've historically had a lot of startups, internet companies as customers. And the beauty of that is they start small. They start with you and they have one server, and then they have 10, and then 100, and then a bunch more. But also sometimes they go 1, 10, 100, 10, 1, 0, So they also die on you or they can't pay you. That's the problem. You can have enterprises, they're much better about paying, but they often take a long time and take forever and have lots of other issues. So it's both have their challenges.
How's the current situation? Do you feel that the market has bounced back to something more normal before coronavirus?
No, definitely not. I think actually we're just seeing now more of the challenges, and we thought we were generally more insulated than other people. If you're in a restaurant business or other stuff, person-to-person businesses, those are obviously terrible and slowly coming back here in China. It appears, though, that a lot of the online businesses, whether that's the car services or airlines or travel or tourism or any of these things, of course, not really happening, right? And so we're starting to see customers, with problems, right, just in the last few weeks. And so that may get worse. I don't really know. We hope not, but these are serious challenges. So no, we're not out of the woods by any stretch right now.
Have you set up any actions to cope with the crisis during the lockdown, after the lockdown?
Well, of course, we're working on, if customers can't pay you have to work on cost and things like this, and being careful about all of that. Working on new investment and stuff like this to do that. Beyond that, we already could work remotely. We have staff around the country and even around the world. So during the lockdown, that was not a big issue. Our office was closed for, I think, a month. And we'd basically work normally. So we were already set up for all that. I think a lot of companies weren't, obviously, and that's more a problem for them. So we didn't have any significant issue other than our people were trapped everywhere, right? And so a lot of them had gone home and working out of their grandparents' basement, and some were trapped in Wuhan for, a month or two. So, but no, it hasn't actually affected how we do things and what we do. So that's good. Probably we're fortunate like that. Now the problem is just the greater economy and can people pay and people invest and things like this,
Wait, so we just mentioned something which is hopefully circumstantial, the current crisis of coronavirus. More generally speaking, since you have been in China and in technology, what are the main differences you have witnessed between the West and China in terms of technological development, managing technology, development of the internet, beyond? We all think about the firewall, the Great Firewall, and the different regulations. But beyond that, have you seen differences in terms of development, languages used, way of operating? I'm asking this question because you have been CTO of Tudo, and you have been working with Chinese players, Chinese companies for a while. So you may have a very, very unique perspective on that.
Yeah, there are differences. Things are mostly the same. They're different in a few ways. The biggest one is sort of, I think, just in, I don't know what you call it, phasing or timing. So, for example, cloud computing here is several years behind the West, particularly behind Amazon. It started several years later. It's growing. It's still much, much smaller than the rest of the world, even though lots being invested. There aren't nearly the services and things that you see outside the country, although that's changing and catching up. And that's broadly true. There are areas, of course, where China is doing well, even ahead, for example, in financial services, obviously in payments and stuff like this, and particularly AI, a lot of work in AI chips and all that kind of stuff. And you could argue that there's more investment image recognition and video and a lot of other things going on here that are actually ahead of the world. But broadly, that kind of stuff is delayed, catching up quickly though. But that does make technology a little bit different. So things like Docker and Kubernetes, some of these really sexy hot technologies, Lambda, is not as common here, not at all. And you mentioned languages. Yeah, China is still pretty much PHP and Java oriented. That's pretty common in the West too, but you're seeing a lot more Python, Go, and then new advanced things like Rust and so on that just are non-existent here. And you can't find Go programmers here either. But so there are some differences, but broadly it's the same. Things in China tend to move faster and be more dynamic. One could argue maybe there's not so much testing and quality isn't really the same. So there are, broad differences like that. Things, I'd say are a little bit sort of behind, maybe the wrong word, but, delayed and move quicker, a little more haphazard, a little less planning, much more dynamic than I think you'd see even in Silicon Valley. So those are the main differences, I think. There's, it's also grown very quickly. And so, a lot of people in the US have 10, 20, 30 years experience in technology, right? Well, those people don't exist here. And so, there's a little bit of difference in terms of seniority kind of thing, right? Everybody at Amazon, literally all the senior people have been doing this kind of stuff since the 80s, sometimes since the 70s. Old mainframe guys are still doing networking at Amazon today, right? And there's a lot of these people there doing their own chips. And all that. There's that kind of wealth of technology experience which doesn't exist really anywhere else, including in China. So, that's to be expected. Now, it's changing over time, but, like any industries here, they're still catching up to some of this stuff. So.
That's a bit surprising, I think, for some people listening to us, because China is seen as now a tech giant. It's seen as very developed. You mentioned financial services with payment system, which may be more developed now than in the West, at least easier to use for the mainstream. But you said that cloud computing seems to be a bit slower, actually, in terms of development, but in terms of size. So in terms of size, we can guess it's actually smaller, because about 84 billion RMB, which is like 13 billion USD, and on the market, which is 100 billion, as you mentioned. But what made you say that it's less developed? On what aspect?
Well, yeah. So first, you got to be really careful of those numbers and can't compare them, right? Whatever the 83 billion number is, those are not apples to apples numbers. If you want to talk about, and I usually focus on let's call it Amazon or Ali style clouds. Aliyun's the biggest player. I haven't looked at their recent numbers, but it's 3 or 4 billion US dollars, I want to say, maybe 5. And they're the biggest player, right? So that market is not 12, it's like 5 or 6, maybe. And the global market, Amazon, I think, is on a track to do 180 billion. The global market is actually probably, by those numbers, it's probably 200, 250. I mean, China's about 2 or 3% of the world. So that's odd in itself, right? You've got the largest country, you've got the second largest economy. Norway probably has more technology and cloud use, right? And so then the question is why? And China's growing quickly, but it really, people understand the scale of it in the rest of the world, right? That it's just really enormous. And part of it is enterprise software, and the software market in China is also very, very small, astonishingly small. For many, I think, historical reasons, software has not been commonly used. People are inexpensive. In the West, you use software historically, whether it's ERP or HR or finance, to save on people, right? Or make processes more efficient. Those things have never been huge priorities here. And so I remember when I first got here, Walmart was trying to get factories, it's kind of suppliers, off of blackboards and whiteboards. And then I'm not sure they fully succeeded at that. And there's a lot of reasons that manufacturers don't want to pay for software, right? People aren't used to paying for software. They don't want to invest in it. It doesn't pay off right away. It provides really good records, which not everybody wants in these small companies, because maybe everything's not as legitimate as it might be. And so you look at the SaaS markets, the HR markets, finance, these things are tiny, tiny compared to the rest of the world. Like I said, I'm pretty sure Norway has more ERP spending than China. And it's just not that common, right? Whether it's SAP or HR, so the SaaS market here, and a lot of it, you can kind of compare different markets, whether it's software development tools, marketing automation, ERP, financial systems, and China is not even in the top 10, right, or more. I think that's going to change, but we saw a big investment in SaaS here, sort of 4 or 5 years ago, and most of those companies are gone. They just went nowhere. And CRM systems, there's no Salesforce things here. Salesforce is going to do, $50 billion in sales this year. There might be a $50 million player here, maybe. We're talking, 1,000 to 1 ratios, right? And that's true in development tools. That's true in other things too. So that is a bigger issue. Is that that technology in sort of corporate use and it's different in personal use, I think, but in corporate use, enterprise software, and all that stuff it's 10 to 1, right? If not 100 to 1 to the US. And so that drives a lot of other things. That drives enterprise spending, drives data center spending, drives cloud spending, and those things. So that, it's a complicated dynamic.
That's indeed very, very interesting. I'm very surprised to see so many companies, whether they are foreign companies here or Chinese companies, using Monday.com, Trello, Salesforce, which doesn't have server in China. I think it's going to change this year. They are going to locate some of the servers within the Chinese market. And indeed, so few Chinese solutions which are stable, no need of VPN, and adapted for the Chinese market with with connection with WeChat and so on are not existing. What's your explanation of that? What's your explanation of the market is not of enterprise software is so small in China?
Yeah, I think, broadly, I think those players do exist. There's certainly copies of everything here. So there were a dozen Salesforce-like CRM systems around, and they are here. And there are many local ERP systems. They're just very small. And you could argue it could be no investment. I think the reality is the customers don't buy. And especially the larger customers. The real money's in bigger companies. So you might have a GE or somebody in the US or General Motors or somebody who maybe are $1 million a month Salesforce customers or $10 million a month. They're just huge, pharmacies, right? Pharmaceuticals may just massive spending on these types of tools, and here that just doesn't exist. Companies won't spend that, or don't spend that, or don't see the value in it, or can't get their users to use it. I'm not really sure. A lot of things are still relatively rudimentary, in terms of a few spreadsheets, and there's also, I think, like there was in the States a long time ago, people don't want to use systems like end users, right? Sales guys don't want to put their information in the system. They want to control it. They don't really want to share it. Information isn't shared as much as you might like it to be. So there's a lot of dynamics, but I think end customers don't buy. They like to buy hardware, like to buy physical stuff, like to see things. Cloud services are kind of, ephemeral or virtual, so that's a little bit of a hard thing. Software that doesn't pay off in the next few months is really hard to justify, and then all the training and costs and all that. And so you're seeing that with some with ERP and SAP and so on, but it's still, still slow going in a lot of ways, especially for the big ticket, big dollar, $1 billion things that are driving a lot of the business in the West. It's still not so much. So I think it's changing, but it's hard to tell. A lot of companies died. Like I said, there were lots of people SaaS funded, and very few of them survived. And so now what? We sort of still need them, right? So they got to come back or got to be redone or whatever, right? So.
How would you say those big companies are then managing their ERP or CRM? Are they building internally, so they're not using enterprise softwares? That may be the difference. Are they doing
that's part of it. Spreadsheets, just nothing. I mean, like I said, used to be a lot of these factories that were. My wife used to work for a chemical company. It was, $50 million company, and I think there were some whiteboards. And the boss's brain, and you have that notion here, mid-size, sort of the German Mittelstand companies, these sort of 10, 20, $50 million companies. A lot of those here, right? Usually run by the Lauban boss. Everything's in his head, and maybe some spreadsheets, right? They control all that information. They don't want to share a lot of stuff. There's not a lot of middle managers, and Sure, there's production in manufacturing, there's production management and stuff, but it's pretty simple. And a lot of stuff on paper. And you have people, right? So people are cheap, especially low end admin, tracking, clerky type people. They've gotten more expensive, but they're still pretty cheap. And you can use a lot of that, right? And so, and if you write it all down, somebody might steal it, somebody might sell it, somebody might, worry about tax payments. And there's a lot of issues that are non-intuitive about how some of this works. Where, a $50 million chemical company in the US would have a lot of systems, to do a lot of stuff. And I think that isn't true here. But I've been away from that for a while, so I'm not sure. But I think that's part of it. And, there's cultural issues and so on. So.
It's very interesting. I have in mind that Indian businesses have difficulties to pay for those enterprise services with high tickets. But it seems that, based on what you are saying, is that it's similar to in China, but for different reasons. I feel. Do you agree with that?
I don't have a great sense on the India side. Actually, my impression is that Indians will pay more for software and technology. Perhaps because they have more exposure to the West. I'm not sure. But I think also now you have WeChat apps and so on. You're seeing a lot of companies do more interesting things, and it's quick and easy to build stuff, like in a WeChat app or something. So you could track your products and your inventory in some warehouse in a very simple way. So I said to you potentially, not unlike how cell phones, mobile phones kind of leapfrog landlines. Everybody went from no phone to mobile phone, especially in India. But in China also to some extent, especially for young people. You may see sort of WeChat and super mini app things sort of leapfrog more traditional SaaS and enterprise software, particularly where, security and accuracy and a lot of other things aren't really that important. I don't think you'd see that in the West as much. But, if you're a factory and you want to track stuff in your warehouse, a WeChat app that some guy makes in a weekend might be all right. And we have the infrastructure now. Everybody's got a phone. Everybody can do this. You can do a lot of really fast stuff. Look at all the disease stuff that's done for coronavirus, right? They create a lot of stuff very quickly. So you may see this very lightweight, very mobile, very interactive, but also sort of innovative and flexible stuff coming as a new layer to sort of replace those things that didn't work. I'm not sure. That's different than I think what you're seeing in the West in that sense, but I'm not sure. It's going to be interesting because they all need to do something, and costs are getting higher. Economy's not doing well. Everybody's got to start thinking about efficiency and start thinking about how do we do stuff and more automated and other things. And of course, WeChat's part of that. But I think you'll potentially see more of that automation and stuff. People talk about robots, right? China always had a lot of people to sew clothes and do whatever, screw things together. Well, now robots and cost and other things become more important. That's physical, but the non-physical part. Do you really need 9 accountants, or can we use like a system and 2 accountants, right? Will become more of a thing. And same in HR. And you've seen some of that with, Ding Ding does a lot of HR stuff with Ali. That's kind of an interesting platform. Very, very simple, but it's useful. So, and it's free, I think, or nearly free. So,
yeah, I was thinking when listening to you that the current crisis actually may push businesses to develop, to use more enterprise softwares, to rationalize, to optimize, and to communicate better with a more efficient team.
Yeah, I think that may likely be true. Yeah.
You raised so $9 million USD in 2015. Would you mind telling us what was it for? Was it to buy servers? What is to build up the team?
Well, the latter. So building the team was the main thing, and to expand our services and sales. Until then we had raised some money, $1 million or so, a little more, and over many years, so you're living very hand to mouth, right? So every new person you add or everything you buy, you have to be very careful and cash flow and all that. And so it was really to really try to expand, to hire sales, more sales, and also develop a product, more this management platform we use, and really grow much larger and sort of drive all of that, right? And sort of take over the management market was our vision. So that was the goal. This was in China. This was a renminbi raise, which was its own set of complications because we were a WOFI and all of this, so a lot of legal and structural stuff to deal with. But yeah, this is renminbi, sort of at the height of of renminbi investing, which has gone down a lot now, and also at the height of sort of the IPO market here being super hot, which helped us, of course. And everybody's like, well, we're going to raise money now. Can we go IPO by the end of the year? Or, a year from now, it's so far away, so there's a lot of that sort of bubble, you might say, of renminbi investing and investors and so on around that time. So that's what helped us. I think a lot of people raised a lot of money, through that period, and a lot of people had a lot of challenges since then. So.
Comparing raising money in the US, in Silicon Valley, and in China, I get the sense that the Chinese investors, especially this period 2015, 2016, 17, were looking for very quick win to invest and get an IPO quickly or resell very quickly, more than in the US, where I feel investors are more used for long term. What differences do you confirm the difference, and what other differences do you see?
Well, I think that's true. I think just broadly, the Chinese investment market has been more short-term, focused. A Series A investor in the U.S. might be 10 years or I think 7 years on average. Now it's become longer. That may be the reality here, but it's not the expectation. And especially, in those periods with the frothy IPO market, it's literally like 7 months or 17 months with a long time out. Partially because you had a lot of new investors coming into the market, and a lot of capital, huge amount of capital, especially once renminbi became more popular, and relatively limited experienced folks, pool of folks to do that, right? The market grew, I don't know, it was doubling every year or whatever. Even if you did that tomorrow in the US, you wouldn't have enough experienced people to manage all that, right? So that was an issue, especially on the renminbi side, because people were, they were doing that, tend to be not so exposed to the international sort of VC practices and market and so on. So I think definitely it was definitely frothy in general, bubbly in general, and then focus more on the short term. And that means partially also not as much maybe due diligence or organization and other things, and understanding the markets as you'd think, because obviously if you're going to add 1,000 VCs and SaaS businesses and nobody's ever done SaaS before, it's really hard to know what to do and ask for, right? And you also had a lot of businesses like the bike-sharing bike businesses and DD, and before that you had Groupon and all these types of businesses that were just piled on. P2P lending was big in that time. So we've had about 4 or 5 of these waves of just massive overinvestment in a bunch of areas that really probably haven't been very helpful either. And it's not clear they're ended, because now we're doing it in coffee. But, maybe luck will help solve that problem. But
when you want to raise money in Europe, in the US, it's pretty clear who you are going to go to try to meet with. You have incubators, you have VCs, you have organization with angels. How is it in China? Do you feel that it's easy to get access to those investors? Are they communicating a lot on the fact that they are looking for companies to invest in, or it's more on a personal level as it used to be? It's portrayed in China with Guangxi, as we say.
Yeah, on one level, I think it's really the same. Yeah, it's definitely, I think all that's true, right? And in the sense that in Silicon Valley, especially, Guanxi is very important also, because investors won't talk to you unless you come through somebody else. If you talk to Silicon Valley people about Chinese Guanxi, whatever, it's just networking in Guanxi in the Valley, just the same thing, really. And that's true here. However, given that you have a lot of investors that are very new, perhaps they're more accessible than they might otherwise be. In China, though, you see the idea of an FA, financial advisor, essentially an investment banker, in the Western world, very common, and very common at low dollar values, right? Even a few $1 million or $1 million or 5 or 10, which should be kind of very rare in Silicon Valley, maybe more common elsewhere. Because you just can't pay for them or afford them, and there's sort of this Silicon Valley perspective of, hey, if you need a banker or need someone introducing, then you're not very good yourself, kind of idea. Where here, they're almost expected or common, and they help manage the deal, they collect investors, they help work on terms. They do a lot of things that lawyers might do kind of in the West, negotiating on your behalf and dealing with some of the issues. Here, the lawyers tend to take a back seat and just kind of process the docs a little more. And the FA not only does the upfront sort of marketing and finding investors, discussions, and also negotiating that sort of the entrepreneur is expected to do, I think, in the West. And here you have a third party that does it. So that's then obviously then who they know, and you choose them based on who they know. So China Renaissance and some of the people that sort of started that way, they're now becoming investment banks, a part of that industry. And then there's a lot of small players and a lot of individuals in that role, that are raising money for other people and call themselves this. The U.S. kind of stopped that and made them become more registered because the U.S. had a big problem with people doing this years ago too. So we're still in that mode here. So.
And have you identified the equivalent of Sequoia of those big players? Do you feel it's comparison with the U.S.?
Well, Sequoia is here, and actually I've known the Sequoia guys forever. And I worked with Sequoia actually when I first came here on some of their companies. So so there's international firms, if you want to, Sequoia, and a bunch of others here. There's also sort of top Chinese funds like Jun Fund who invested in us and some other people that are sort of tier 1 or class A firms, and then there's smaller ones and other people that are less experience or less size or so on. And so, there's I don't know, maybe a dozen, let's call them global or American firms here, and then a half dozen or a dozen sort of top Chinese firms, and there's, a lot more, another 1,000, something like that. So, and they all have different perspectives, different history, different issues, some are RMB, some are dollars, some are both, some are a lot of things,
I'd like to move to the typical questions I ask at the end of the interview. One of them is about books. What are the books which have most inspired you in building your business, in managing your business? If you can share some books that could inspire others.
Yeah, I mean, I read a lot of books. They're all kind of pieces and parts and useful here and there. And some of the Silicon Valley books are good. Ben Horowitz has a good one on startups, a couple actually from Andreessen Horowitz. But two that I wanted to mention that I think are unusual, although they're starting to make the rounds in Silicon Valley, are both actually books out of the U.S. Navy. And there's a book called It's Your Ship, and another book called Turn the Ship Around. And they're actually both about leadership. And they're about how to lead and inspire and manage, large numbers of new people and just organizations and middle management, especially like in our business, we have a lot of junior staff and engineers. It's very much like the military, right? You suck in a lot of young people and you have to sort of mold them, build the culture and all that. And both It's Your Ship and Turn the Ship Around are about that. They're both about Navy captains that come into situations that are challenging and problems, and it's sort of how they dealt with that and their philosophy. And I found both those to be extremely good. I recommend them to everybody. Just about, and very practical, like stuff they do about, so for example, in one of them, they let the most junior sailor on the ship do the tour. Normally the captain does the tour, but they have the most junior sailor do it and tell you all about the ship. So we actually adopted that. So when customers and people come to our office, we let new employees do the tours. So they have to learn, obviously, about our company, right? And they have to learn everything. We actually had tour qualifying processes. So if you wanted to lead the tour, you had to be qualified to lead the tour. And that's very much what they did in the book, too. And, it inspires people. It does all this stuff. And they have to learn the history of why we did it, what we do. And we had a very impressive sort of tour process. So lots of stuff like that. And just, I'd have to look it up. I'll send it to you afterwards. I don't have that right in front of me. So, but they're easy to find on Amazon and so on. And maybe we could put a link somewhere. Yeah. There's two different books, two different authors, but similar.
More specifically about China, would you have a book that open your eyes on China? Could be a book, could be actually publications or even movies.
Yeah, I separate China stuff into old China, new China. And starting with old China, I'm quite a student of sort of old, late 19th century, early 20th century China, basically 100 years ago, right? When people just like us were here doing exactly the same things, maybe not on the computer, but we're entrepreneurs running stuff here in China, trying to make money, trying to do things, and a lot was written about that. And I find that all extremely interesting because it was right on these very streets that we're on, right? And so Carl Crow was a famous American, and there are books here like Old China Hand, which is about him and the whole time here, newspapers and publication and, wars were starting and a lot of things haven't changed. So a lot of people's interest and hype and frustrations and challenges all around China he writes about these literally 100 years ago. So I find that very interesting. And he actually wrote a book called 400 Million Customers, which was about the Chinese market in 1935 or so, 25, I forget. And so one of the books I found good about China more recently was 1 Billion Customers, written about 10 years ago, which tries to talk about the China market and kind of growth. That was patterned after Carl's book. But more recently, I haven't read that much. And so book-wise, I think there's been less writing. Some of the stuff today is more about trade wars and politics and that kind of stuff. And that's interesting, but not all that helpful, really. I pay attention more to like Caixin, and sort of the newspaper and sort of tech note on tech stuff. Bill Bishop's Sinocism newsletter is good about sort of what's going on in China. It's a little more political, but also economic and policy and some of these issues. So sort of a smattering of things. I haven't read a lot of new China book stuff in a while. Kaiser Kors has he moved back to the US. He has a good podcast that I catch up occasionally. So there's a few that are nice. Yeah, about China. He and Jeremy Goldcorn, I think, do one, and they're old China hands for sure, and they do politics and stuff too. So
yeah, Bill Bishop is certainly one of the newsletters to recommend for sure on China, and Caixin is not as known as it should be in the West actually, because they are covering very well those issues, right, with coronavirus, for instance, and they have an English version too.
Yeah, and it's subscribed and it's pretty expensive, and they do good work on, especially the business side, of things, which is different than kind of others are focused more on the politics, which is important, of course. But if you want to know more numbers and what's going on in jobs and these issues, Caixin has always been the leader there, and TechNote is useful for tech stuff, what's going on in startups and stuff in English, all in English, and there's Chinese stuff too. So.
What productivity tools do you like to use in China? Actually, that's correlated to what we talked about before. There are a lot of productivity tools we don't find in China. Like, I don't know if you like Evernote, but it's difficult to. It's not. There is not China's equivalent. Easy to use. Trello and so on. What productivity tools do you like to use here?
Well, we still use those. Actually, we're still a big Google Docs fans, which is not easy to use, but it's helped us a lot, actually, in terms of sharing files and so on. I use Evernote a lot also, which works actually pretty well. I'm an old email guy, and so my email is still my main tracking and productivity tool, the calendar. I'm not good at to-do lists. I end up with 100 of them, and then I have to-do lists on my to-do list, and that doesn't really help me. So it's pretty basic stuff. But I use Evernote more actually for writing and documents and recording, like sales meetings and notes to do, stuff like that, more long form stuff. My calendar is still a key productivity thing, and my email drives that. So my browser, I have 100 tabs open to remind me to read stuff. So I put it on a list and it never happens. So I use my browser.
If you had some extra time, what would you work on?
Well, I'm always working on new things, thinking about new products, trying to write more blogs and Medium posts, and trying to think about different things, trying to think about new technology products. I'm thinking about making a wine collection management tool, because I hate all the ones that are out there. Things like that. Long term, if I had money, the question is time versus money, right? If I had money and time to do that, I'd be much more in the U.S. focused on stuff like prison reform and blue collar education. I wrote a book about 15 years ago about sort of offshoring and blue collar, white collar, middle class, and all that kind of stuff. And so I'm very interested in those sort of labor economics and labor education. And realistically, Trump got elected on a lot of those issues of blue collar and middle America hollowing out and all that. I spent a lot of time, a lot of thinking about those sort of things, and would be focused on how do we, improve those folks' life. And some of that gets into then, people of color and prisons and other things, all related, right? And we have to do better in those areas. So if I was sort of retired today, I'd be doing a lot of work in those areas. So that's pretty far from where I'm at. Offshoring the middle class So it was about, the time, this is right after Thomas Friedman's World is Flat thing. It's about, historically we've offshored, of course, blue collar and manufacturing jobs, because I used to be in manufacturing and in Japan and so on in the 80s. And I was concerned about offshoring the white collar jobs, which you're seeing some of, engineering, accounting, all that sort of stuff. Not as much as I thought we would, and maybe now it's coming back, but what happens when we start losing middle class jobs and white collar jobs, and then how do you prepare for that? How do you help blue and white collar folks become more educated or whatever, prepared for the 21st century? But also, how do you reduce exactly the things we see, which is fear of foreigners, fear of the rest of the world, isolationism, all these things that caused us problems 100 years ago, and recent elections also still causing problems. So that's language classes, travel issues, education, workforce things, and this stuff's really hard. I have a lot of exposure to some of these challenges. I'm from Maine and from sort of rural, relatively poor areas, and a lot of ideas about this stuff. So you got to do it, because obviously all over the world, people are disaffected, losing jobs, whatever, and they're electing people who really aren't going to do a great job for any of us. So, and that's true in Europe and in the US right now. So need to spend more time on that. But that's why, what's his name? That wrote about West Virginia and so on. Can't remember the name of the book, but so these poor, impoverished areas, and the real challenges that are there are a challenge. So.
Putting that in perspective with current topics with AI, are you worried with AI stealing the jobs from humans?
Well, no, in the sense that, yes, no. I'm an old automation guy, so I started in factories and robotics and automation. So I've seen that since the 70s or 80s, and the reality is that automation, in whatever form it is, has taken 10 or 100 times the jobs that offshoring does, or other sorts of things. I think AI will be similar, but where it'll be the dynamic again of like this middle class, where obviously robots and other things take jobs from guys screwing tires on cars, whatever. AI can begin now to do some of these jobs that white collar or office people did, and that's where you're going to see some of this backlash. I talk about that in my book, where the accountant or the designer or the professional jobs are going to have more trouble. But it's hard to know. All these jobs create more jobs, right? And so robots create more stuff, drones, rocketry, all these. But the challenge is, how do you transfer the workforce? And how do you give them hope? Because it's all these opioids, all this Trump stuff, Europe, all that is all about the future of hope, right? And where am I going? If I see my job and I'm fearful and all that, and it gets stoked by nationalism, this is just really bad. So how do you transition those folks into wherever the future is for all of these things? And I think we don't know. And AI is going to enable all kinds of stuff you couldn't do before. So it's very interesting. A lot of it is helping. AI drones, drones with AI looking at farms and telling you where to apply crops, right? Well, that raises the income of farmers, which helps rural areas. Is that bad? That's a really good thing, right? And so, and the same in a whole bunch of areas, AI apps on your phone that can do a bunch of stuff that you couldn't do before, medicine, all this kind of stuff, So it's just how do we leverage that? And that requires, smart thinking and policy and R&D, a lot of stuff that maybe isn't happening. But, and how do you retrain people? And how do you just give them hope and a lot of stuff, right? So that's why I'm interested in that. That's really important. Sadly, recent elections all over the world show that this is still a problem. So.
The last two questions I usually ask are about unexpected success and unexpected failure you witnessed in China, not yours, but the one you saw in the society or in business. Reason why I'm asking this question is because it's a way to see changes at stake. Peter Drucker, the founder of strategy in business, said that if you want to assess changes, you may look at successes or failures you were not expecting, but actually happened. What would you say over the last 15 years you have been in China about a success in business, in the world of business, or in society, which has been pretty surprising to you, not expected, and the same and on the other side of failure?
Interesting. I didn't realize Drucker said that. It makes sense. I think unexpected success, thinking about that in the big perspective over the last few years, has been the online payments. So, how quickly China has gone from, paper money to digital payments. And success of Alipay and so on. And they did it very quickly, right? Really over a year. And it took massive investments. I don't know if you remember, but they flooded the market with all these little devices, right? It took a lot of things coming together, of course, bandwidth and digital and all that, and cheap Android devices. But literally every stall in every street in the whole country of 1 billion people suddenly had a payment system, and did that within 6 months or a year with just armies of people. And so, and it worked brilliantly, right? And it works really well. You wouldn't have expected that, right? You think other places would do that, and a lot of things led to that. So that was pretty impressive. And I think related to that is there are a lot of Chinese companies that have a lot of problems and are even bad, like Luckin and other people. But also we should look for and celebrate Chinese companies that do well in a bunch of ways, right? And there are some global players, whether it's like DJI, the drone people. I like Anker, Anker, that makes batteries and other things. We're probably the best in the world at this stuff, right? And it's a local Chinese company based in your DJI. People like that, right? You just don't expect and really take over the world in a commodity product. You're like, wow, that's pretty cool. Failure-wise, I think unexpectedly, just in terms of industry-wise, the whole bike sharing mess, somewhat surprising, like something that we really need, we still have, we really use, and just an example of just how this stuff piles on, right? And then destroys the whole industry. And, I guess Didi and car sharing kind of escaped that when Uber left, and they only blew away about $10 billion. But the whole bike and all these other sharing industries really, really fail. And I think that was pretty surprising because that market should have been pretty good, and now it's a wasteland. Beyond that, other failures, I'm not sure any come to mind. I try to focus on the future and success, so try to remember not remember all the failures. I don't know.
Thanks so much for your time. Well, very, very interesting, very inspiring. You mentioned that you have a blog. Would you tell us what's the URL?
Mostly today, if I'm writing long form, it's on Medium, which unfortunately is not available in China. But you can search for my name. A lot of stuff shows up. So I have some stuff on LinkedIn. Most stuff goes to Medium though, and then on Twitter. I have a lot of stuff there. So Twitter, I publish kind of everything, links to stuff. So both of which are hard to get in China, but yeah. And I was my name SteveMushero.com works too, but that's not updated very much. So.
Thanks so much again. I really enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed it too, and I hope everyone enjoyed listening to the show. Thanks everyone, and stay safe.